Kumlen Ablat Gemara. Today's daf is daf Samach Gimel. We're actually up to the middle of the page by the Mishnah. In today's Gemara, you're going to see why it's so important to learn daf Yomi. Because if you're learning the yeshiva world, in the regular world of learning, if you want to know a subject on Hilchos Shabbos, you're going to learn Masechta Shabbos. I mean, that's where you're going to find it. And sometimes a part of it in Masechta Shabbos will send you off to other places. But to find a sugya about Shabbos in a totally unrelated Masechta, you would never think to look in Menachos to find something about Shabbos. It's just incredible. Or Teisha says in Krisis that you got to learn everything to get a good coverage. In fact, the Rambam writes I'll tell you this. I told you this once before. The Rambam, the Chacham Nil once asked the Rambam about a certain halach in the Hilchos Tzech where he got it from, and the Rambam told him clearly it's in probably Makkas or in Sanhedrin. Anyway, they wrote back. We learned through the whole Sanhedrin, all of us again and again. We can't find it. We learned Makkas, can't find it. They gave him another Masechta, gave him a few Masechtas. Finally, he learned it. He said he figured out it came from a Masechta Yevamis. It was a question in the Gemara, and from the Gemara's answer, he gleaned this teretz. And then the Rambam says one regret he has in the Rambam why he didn't write his Mar Mekaymis. So here we have it, as we'll see later at the end of the Gemara. It says the Mishnah in the middle of the page. So remember, there are different kinds of menachos, and fascinating that we're learning now in Chitas exactly all about this. And in the next few days, you'll learn about the different menachos, and you will learn it. You read, you'll appreciate the Torah and the Rashi far better than before because you'll see the different kinds of menachos that we have. If you say I'm going to bring a mincha that's called a mincha mafa, a mincha that's baked in the oven. Lo yavi mafa kupach. And if you remember in Masechta Shabbos, we learned this. It talks about there's a tanur. We have different laws of shehi and chazara, leaving things on inside an oven or returning it. There's an oven, a tanur. There's a kupach, which is in between, and then you have a kira. And basically, Rashi explains and describes those ovens in those days. A tanur was like a cone. You have a hole on top, so you can put one keli, but at the bottom it's wide and it gets much narrower. So the heat is very, very concentrated, very, very hot, and that's why that taking the ashes out is not good enough here because it's still very, very hot. On the other hand, the kira is a box, a square box with two holes on top, and if you have one keli there, there's plenty of room for the heat to expand, so it's not as hot. And then you have a kupach. Kupach is a box, but only one hole on top. So sort of in between, and you put things inside as well. So when you say tanur, does it have to be strictly a tanur? Can include a kupach as well, and using a kupach to make this a yetzer your mincha. Says the Mishnah, he said that'll be an oven. Don't bring something baked inside a kupach. But not something baked on top of tiles. Even though tiles are hot, it's open. So it never gets as hot. Or arbim, or these big, large Arab big pots, and they used to stick. Remember those they used to stick the bread, the dough onto the sides, like we had, mad big pots betanu. That's how they did it. That's what we do today, flat. All of these, that's not called tanur, and you're not yetzer, you're mincha. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, maybe mava kupach. He says yes, kupach is all right because he said kupach is considered included in tanur as far as menachos are concerned. What happens? He says, now we had this before already. We had the Gemara a few times, but after Rav Papa saying, which is as follows: you say you bring upon yourself a mincha of a mafa baking, and yet the Torah says you have a choice. Either you bring chalos, or you bring kikin. The kikin are thin wafers. You put a little bit of oil on top, and chalos are oil mixed inside, and I guess the bigger is lo yavi machze chalos and machze kikin. You got to choose either chalos or the kikin. 10 loaves of this, 10 loaves of that. You can't have half and half. Oh, but Rab Shimon is matir. Rab Shimon said you can even have half and half because they all come under the same korban, and therefore you can pick and choose. And as I said last time, according to one Pshat and Rashi, when the Mishnah counts 10 different menachos, according to Rab Shimon, it's actually 11 because you have a chalas, you have a kikin, and then you have the combination of the two. I think Gemara explained the basis for each opinion. So we learned mafe tanur v'le mafe kupach. It says that you only an oven, but not the kupach and not the mafe oven the tiles. V'le mafe yedus are being right, which is our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, so that's what Tanna Kama said. You cannot use a tanur kupach. Rabbi Yehuda says you can. Why? Because it says in the pasuk tanur twice. It says the mincha that you will bake it b'tafa b'tanur. So it says tanur there. And then it says, when you bring a korban minchas mafa tanur, why every time you have to say mafa, you say the word tanur? It says it twice. And so therefore, so he says twice, lahachshe mafakupach. It's a miyat. The ain miyat achamiyat elarabas. Tanner zafkan oven. It says again twice to tell you to include, to expand, not only a strict oven like Hilchos Shabbos. We say there's only a tanner. We're going to include also a kupach as well.
Just kupach or all the other?
No, just kupach. A pot, no, because it's still an oven, but not as hot as a tanner, but still an oven. Rab Shimon says, no. When do we say that it comes to be marbe? I can be Tanakama, but when does it come to say it becomes to be marbe? If there's no, it's redundant. But here I tell you, we need both tanners, so therefore there's nothing extra. And if it's only strictly a tanner, not a kupach, and why is not extra? Rab Shimon says, tanur, shnei pa'amim. That's twice. Echad shetei but tanner. The first one to tell you, Pasha, you have to bake it in the oven. The echad sheyehei hegdeshan betaner. Second one is, when does it become kodesh? Not in the kelim, the clay shard. It becomes kodesh when you put it inside the oven. Put it inside the oven. So Gemara asks a question now. Since the oven does not have to be, according to Reb Shimon, does not have to be inside the Beis Hamikdash. It can even be outside the Beis Hamikdash. So how does it become kodesh in the oven? In order for something to become kodesh, it has to be done inside the Beis Hamikdash, inside the courtyards. This, as Rab Shimon will say in a minute, the oven can be outside. If it's outside, how you mekadesh? What's pshat? He says the second one you need to mekadesh for the Gemara. We always used to say that the shtei halechem and the lechem aponim are kosher in the azara, and kshed is also kosher in Beis Pagi. You can even do them outside of the Beis Hamikdash, right? In Beis Pagi, which is like outside of the wall of Beis Hamikdash. Different opinion of what exactly Beis Pagi is, but it's outside the Beis Hamikdash. Could even be outside of the wall of Yerushalayim. Or outside the wall around, the old city. It's not outside. So therefore, how can it be kodesh? Rashi explains the pshat is that if the Tanner is mekadesh, you're puzzled with yaitze. As if to say, Rashi holds, yaitze doesn't mean you're taking it out of the Beis Hamikdash after it became kodesh. Even if you create kedusha outside the Beis Hamikdash, it became yaitze this moment, even though you didn't take it out, but it's outside now. But the problem with that is everyone asks is, it can't become kodesh outside in the first place. It's not a question of yaitze here. There's no kedusha. So that's why the Menachos is very differently. So the Gemara, a lot of Rashis are similar to Rabbeinu Gershom. As you know, Rashi's Rebbe was Rabbi Yaakov ben Yoker, and Yaakov ben Yoker was the main Talmud of Rabbeinu Gershom. So Rashi a lot of times follows Rabbeinu Gershom, but here he seems not to follow Rabbeinu Gershom. But a lot of the Rashis here, they say there's a Tos Hatfus, there's a little mistake, so you never know. Maybe. Anyway, Rava says what it means, what Rav Shimon meant was not that when you put it in the oven it becomes kodesh. If it's outside Beis Hamikdash, it can't. What it means is that when you consecrated the mincha, and when you make a promise, you're going to make this mincha, you should say, I'm doing this, that should become kodesh, and use it for l'shem tanur. Now, unfortunately, don't understand what exactly that's all about, and they don't have an answer. What do you have to say? I'm makdish in the same town. You just say, I'm going to make this mincha, or I'm going to be makdish this mincha. What do you mean? Because not kodesh yet. You're going to make it kodesh later. But so what do you mean? I'm makdish it in order to use it in a tanner. What does that mean? If you're saying mincha's mafer, that's what it means, a tanner. What exactly does it mean? Rashi says, when you makdish the flour, you should say, I'm doing it on condition, I'm going to bake it in the oven on your makdisha, and not what? So every other carbon you say, I'm makdish it into what, to shecht it? You don't say that. You say, I'm makdish for shlamim, I'm makdish for azach. That's what you say. What is this? The activities that you do afterwards is activities. Whatever mincha you decided, that's what you do with that kind of a mincha. That's not clear. Anyway, talking about we learned, now we want to understand the machlekes of Yehuda says that you have a choice. Tanner or kupa. Oh, sorry. And then we have another machlekes. We have a machlekes whether you can go ahead and you have to only have chalus or the king. It's your choice. Or kol shimon, you can mix. What's going on here? What's the machlekes here? Regarding the kupach, we already explained. Tanner, shtepam. Says the Gemara. We learned the chisakri. It says in pasuk when you bring the carbon mincha baked in the oven, it says in the pasuk make out of flour. So you bring a chalus mixed with oil. That's chalis, or the cookie matzahs mishuchim b'shemer. Cookie matzahs are smeared with oil on top. one or the other. So Torah we learn it says the chisakriv loshen yochid kishetakriv last double. So you want to volunteer a mincha, carbon mincha. So therefore, I'm going to be minayin loim hari alayim minchas ma'afish shalayavi machzor chalos maskin. I know you have to pick and choose one chalos or the kicking. Tamad loim carbon mincha is loshen yochid. You have to choose carbon echla martilach l'shnayim b'shleish gabanis. Choose either chalos or the kicking. Amar Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon said to him, "V'chi nemar carbon shnei pamim." Does it say two? According to you, chalos is one kind of a carbon, and the kikim is another carbon. So the Torah should have said lashon rab karbanos or carbon chalos, carbon kikim. It's one word carbon for both, which means they both form part of the same carbon. So why can't you mix it? The number says chalos or kikim. Ma'ata from now the Torah clearly says chalos maybe the kikim maybe. Whatever you want to make chalos alone, do the kikim alone do. Machzor chalos and machzor kikim maybe do that same thing. And then, if you bring both, what do you do? Because remember, then you're supposed to do kmitza. So normally by flour, you do kmitza the flour itself. Well, the other one we had machzor marcheshet. But if it's in the oven, which is pretty hard, this is a hard one as well. You have to do a kmitza of the dough of the baked challah, whatever it is, and then you break it down. The Gemara later on I have all my chaleks how exactly it's done. You break it down to very very fine. You mix the two together, the challahs and the kikin, and that's what you put on the mizbeach. The kaimitz it's a boil and you mix the two together. The kaimitz mishnayim and you put it on the mizbeach, and Rashi adds over here the word you add oil, and that's Mefarshim asks why do you have to add oil? Whatever it is, it is. The im kamatz va'olah b'yameich and shnei yatsa. And even if you ended up in your hand sachakol, all you had was the chalas, the kikin. Good enough because they all became one. They all come under the word carbon. Doesn't matter. Okay, so Yehuda says you have to have strictly only chalas or the kikin. If Shimon says you mix, comes along his son. Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda says, "Menayin lo'imer." How do you know if somebody says that you're like michas ma'afish lo'yavi machzor chalas maskin? Don't do like his father says, but he brings a different pasuk. His father said because it says the word carbon. You know, you have to choose one carbon. He says from another pasuk altogether. Talmud lo'imer says the pasuk that the chol mincha shetafel tanur any mincha you bake in the oven, the chol nase b'macheshes anything that you make in this deep frying pan or v'al machvas or on top of the frying pan. Lekoyin hamakriv oisa loitia. You give it to the koyin who's makriv. Then the next pasuk says the chol mincha belula b'shemen any mincha that's mixed with oil or chareva that's totally dry. The chol b'nei Aaron tia you give it to the b'nei Aaron. Now, in the case of belula or chareva, there's two separate menachos. Shnei minachalukin. There's two separate kabbanas. Nobody thinks that you can mix it two, give half and half. It's a separate. Here has oil, has no oil. Is af kola omalamayla. So too, everything else that we say above, shnei minachalukin. So therefore, chalas and the kicking. Every time that we say a different thing, it's two separate minutes. So he brings a different drasha altogether than his father does. And they don't combine. You can't have half and half. Freddy Gemara before you get to his son. Rabbi Yehuda, Shapakam, Shimon is right. It doesn't say carbon. According to you, she says two separate carbons. It just says carbon once. So Rabbi Yehuda answered, Kivin dechsiv. In that pasuk it says you should bring chalis matzah belulul bashemen mixed with oil, and then it says the kiki matzah mishuch kiki matzah that's smeared with oil. It says twice the word shemen. It's as if it's saying it's two separate carbonas. Otherwise, why repeat shemen twice? B'Shemen. Command the cause of carbon, as if it's telling you two different kabbanas. And Reb Shimon, and Reb Shimon was seeking an answer. No, Reb Shimon says it's not to telling you it's two different kabbanas. It says one carbon for all them because it's really all one carbon. You can mix and choose. But why does it say twice b'Shemen? Because he likes see b'Shemen. If it wouldn't say Shemen, you know what I would have thought? I would have thought you only could bring half and half. If it wouldn't say Shemen twice, I would say, well, this is what this carbon is made up of. Half of it should be the kicking. And half of it should be chalas. By saying Shem twice, I tell you can also. So not only he argues, by him, it's forget. The chiddush is you can do the kicking on its own. You can do chalas on its own. Not my chiddush is you can mix it too. I would have thought dafke machzor chalas and machzor kicking has to be combined. Aber chalas the chadayu, the kicking chadayu, but chalas on its own, the kicking on its own, a malay. Kamashalon that you can mix. Depending on who the hainavu, what's the chiddush? He brings different pasuk, but otherwise the halacha is the same. You cannot mix. What happens if he actually did it? According to Rabbi Yehuda, We learn that from the word carbon. It says carbon echad. So but the Eved, if you mix it, since the trader says itself, it's all under one carbon. But the Eved, you are Yetzer. But according to his son, who said, who says that you learn it from the pasuk that just like Chareva and Blue B'Shem are totally different menachas, and you can't mix the two. Same thing, you cannot mix chalash and kikin. That means even by the Eved, if you mix it, you haven't fulfilled your neder and you have to do it again. Adna Allah kol menachas. And the next page talks all about Sfiras Omer or Minchas Omer, the Mincha that we do in Omer. Says the Gemara, Bishmol says, Omer Hayabab Shabbos, that this Omer is so important that in the second day Pesach, which we'll discuss the whole argument with this Dukin later on, by Susim, not Dukin, by Susim, that if the second day Pesach fell out on Shabbos, you can be Mechal Shabbos in order to bring the carbon Omer. And you bring it Misholosh Soyin, you bring it from 3 saw. And all we need is 1 isaron, a tenth of 3 saw. But we bring 3 saw and we sieve it, we sift it till we get fine flour. And we'll see that your mother, you do it 13 times. And then you get your fine flour. And you do a number of malachas on Shabbos. You have to have a sickle, you have to harvest, you have to cut, you have to winnow, all that. You do it on Shabbos. And you do the sifting as well, which is boiler and all that. But on the weekday is mechamish. You'll do 5. If the second day Pesach falls on a weekday, you'll cut 5 soyin, so much easier to get to 1 soyin of really fine flour. And when you have 3 soyin, you have to do it a few times because the first time you'll have less than a soyin. You have to put the balance in again, and the quality is not going to be as good. No, but you have 5, the quality will be top quality because the first time you'll get out of the 5 soyin, you'll get more. If you get the other one, you're not going to get top quality. Anyway. So the Gemara, Chacham disagree. They say Echad Shabbos, Echad Chol, Meshel Shayboy. Make notes. The Gemara later will talk about how many times you have to sift and all that. The Gemara will discuss that.
What do you mean? Why should Shabbos be different? Like, what's the?
Oh, we will see. That's a whole Gemara discussion. And the Chacham say no difference. Echad Shabbos, Echad Chol, no difference. You always do Mishalish, always do 3 sa. What do you call it? Shabbos, you want to minimize the Yisurim Shabbos. You only have 1 person standing there and harvesting. Only 1 sickle, only 1 box carrying over choil. But in the weekday, Bishloisha, make it easier. 3 people, Bishal 3 boxes, Bishal Shmraglas, and 3 sickles. Chacham say Echad Shabbos, Echad Choil. Sounds like Chacham say we don't care about being minimizing, as if they're arguing whether we'll see more later. Huy or Hutra, whether Shabbos is being pushed away or actually there's no Easter of Shabbos when it comes to these things. Bishloisha, Bishal Shkuvim, get Shmraglas 3. We do 3, and the more later will say because we want to be mafarsim. We want to be mafarsim. The whole world should know that you're allowed to do this on Shabbos, not like the by Susim who say that it's always on a Sunday. Because it says in Machas Shabbos, so they say it's always on a Sunday. They hold that the best one is b'shalosh soyin. They hold that the best one is with 3 soyin. From 3 soyin come out the best. Mike said, what's the Bishmal's view? Like you asked, each of somebody sudden move he hold the best comes out of 5 so and then if Shabbos nami. Shabbos is suspended, so we want the best. Why should Shabbos be inferior to the weekdays? No boss. And even Misholosh, if he holds 3 is enough, then if you b'chol nami, then why not in the weekday 3? Omar Rava says, Kashavar Rabbi Shmuel holds Isarim Muvcher B'loy Tirche. You want to get the best flour without any bother, without any hassles. You don't have to then sieve it so many times over and over again because you'll get it the very first time. You get out of 5 so. But if you want it out of 3, you got to work harder. Why? Because you have to sift it many more times. It's much better. Why? Less tircha. But Shabbos, mutiv sheyarbe melacha achas b'hakodah, ba'al yarbe melachas harbe. 5 saw means you have to cut more. You do more malachas on Shabbos. No, but it's a question of convenience. So, on better doing a Shabbos out of 3, okay, requires 1 malacha to do it again and again and again. Hakada, you have to take it, but you're cutting a lot less. You're doing a lot less malachas, and you just keep on going through the sift again. So you're doing the same malacha a few times. So therefore, he says it's better to do that than to do, and that's why Shabbos he minimizes it. He minimizes it. Yeah. Interesting. He holds, even though you're doing, so now you have to do a malacha many times. So he holds doing the same malacha 5 times is less of an aveda than doing 5 malachas once. No, if you're doing 5 saw, you have to have more sickle, whatever it is. Here, you're doing extra hakadas, you're doing extra, sifting and all that, which is also one of the 39 malachas, but it's the same malach. And he seems to hold, you need a swatter for that. That doing the same malacha a number of times is less severe than doing different malachas. Than doing different malachas.
You also think tzircha, and you don't want tzircha on Shabbos.
True, but that's not being Nissan, that's more than Rabbanon. Sounds like, there's a general question. When you're doing a malach on Shabbos, is the Isa the fact that you're over Shabbos, or the Isa was that you're over this particular malach on Shabbos? So it seems if you hold that the Isa is your over Shabbos, then might not come in doing the same malacha 5 times or the malacha. If you're holding the Isa, so maybe if it's only one Isa, it's not so bad. Anyway, you need swara. Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shmuel Benoy. Now the Gemara is going to discuss where does Rabbi Shmuel coming from? The idea of trying to minimize the Isurim and Shabbos. Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shmuel. The Gemara give different attempts. Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Yechim Abroika, somebody else. They both say the same thing, that we try to minimize Shabbos. How have we learned? When it comes to a Korban Pesach, you do it on Shabbos itself, you shech and everything else, and then you got to take out the parts that go on the mizbech. But you have to cut open and make an incision on the hide to take out the inners. So during the week, generally you just cut all the way from top to the bottom to the legs. Mashenken on Shabbos, so you just cut all the way down, even though you don't really need to cut all the way down. It's just that's nicer, or you just cut to the part that you need to get to the memudim and all that. And that's where you stop. So the Gemara says, no, don't do it all the way. Just do it just what you need. But you do like a weekday, you cut all the way down. So and Mila Amar Bishma ben Abir Hasam called Hey Chadef, same idea. Why do extra on Shabbat? It's not necessary. So the Hachanami came the extra same over here. Why do 5 so if you get away with 3 so? Chayru sound like the same spot. Said he totally unrelated. Then how do you know? Dilma can the Rabbi Shmuel didn't say over here El Deleka Bezoin Kachim. You know why Rabbi Shmuel said over here that we minimize it because it's not embarrassing or anything else where you do 3 or 5. So you do 3 and you work a bit harder. Or there, the problem is when you start fully cut, the animal looks like a carcass, there's a vela. And it's really a holy animal. So therefore, maybe Shmuel cut it all the way, make it in an edifying way. Maybe Rabbi Shmuel, we made the Rabban cut it all the way. Maybe Rabbi Shmuel argues over the reason why he says that what do you call it? That you only do part of the way is because that's all you need to do. But you don't have to be Chal Shabbos because that's all you're doing is for the Eibish's sake, and that's enough. But here you're not doing it for the Eibish's sake. Here you're doing it because it's easier to get to the way we have to get it. And you have to Mechal Shabbos in order to do that. Maybe we're not talking about Kabbanis here. There's no carbon here. So maybe Kirabanis Vidale. Maybe you'll hold that Rabbanon. Don't do 5. Just he said that you do Shabbos exactly what you do during the week, no difference. So it's totally unrelated. So the Gemara. But Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Chanina's Gan Koinim say the same thing. That now we're right here in the Mishnah. Now we learn Rabbi Chanina's Gan Koinim Shabbos, on Shabbos is a minimize. Only one person should cut maglecha, one sickle, kupacha, one box of a choil. On the weekday, b'shalosh kupa b'shalosh magles. And the Chachamim say echad Shabbos b'shalosh kupa b'shalosh magles. Mila kam rayichas Gan Koinim has. And what's the svara Rabbi Chanina? Even the efshel the chinam minimize the tirch. So hachanami keep the efshel the chinam. Over here also, when it comes to a 5 saw, 3 saw, do 3 saw. So the Gemara, how do you know? Dilma, you know why Rabbi Shmuel says over here that what you do 3 saw, there's no Pesum Milsa where you do 3 saw, 5 saw. But to negate the view of the Baisus, it makes no difference 3 saw, 5 saw. So therefore he says, let's do 3 saw and minimize the Chilul Shabbos. Abel Hasam did the Ike Pesum Milsa. Why Rabbanah say you have to have 3 people? Why even during the week have 3 people when you can do 1 person? If you want the world to know that yes, that you can do this on Shabbos. Maybe he holds like the bottom when it comes to the Magla. Maybe he holds, yes, we want 3 people there because Mehadin you're allowed to. It's only a question of Tircha. We want 3 people there so that the world will know that there is this by Susim are wrong about that it never happens on Shabbos. Or inami, whether you do 1 or whether you do 3, you're doing it correctly, the full amount. Maybe over here, if the halach is you should have 5, so you're only doing 3, you're not doing it fully correct. So they do whatever the full amount is. So no right from here. Elom, but Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yesi, that's now we learned. When talking about the new moon, the Eidim HaMachal Shabbos to get to the Bezdin so they can tell them what's happening. Bein Shenida Ba'ol, whether the moon is seen very, very clearly, that everybody can see it. Bein Shenida Ba'ol, but very, you can see the moon is very faint, and maybe you the only lucky ones that saw it. Is Machal all of the Shabbos. The Tanna Kama says. That's the whole story of Rabbi Akiva. You told someone not to Mechal Shabbos, and Gabil gave him a chelik. You're going to stop people from coming. They'll think, why should I be Mechal? Why should I come Mechal Shabbos when there's others probably in Shleim? It's all the same thing. So the Tanakama says because you might think Nila Ba'ol, if it's so clear, I'm sure others saw it as well. Why do you have Mechal Shabbos? No, come. You're the only ones. You have to imagine. And Rabbi Yossi says, Im Nila Ba'ol, if everybody saw it, ain't Mechal Shabbos, then don't do it. Mila Rabbi Yossi Hasan, what's the svarik? Even the Ev Shalichin, since it's possible you don't have to come because the others have saw it, don't be matriach. So it's Hachanami, even the Ev Shalichin. You can get away with 3, why do 5? Says more again. Totally unrelated. Mimai. Why is the Bishmos over here? That's svara there. When it comes to the moon, if you're going to tell the guy not to be Mechal Shabbos, not to be Mechal Shabbos, you're going to say, oh, next time they won't come anymore because I think other people saw it. We don't have that svara over here. He said, what can go wrong? What can go wrong if we minimize it? Let's minimize the Chil Shabbos. Why not? What are you worried about? But there, Rabbi Shmuel might be made. We're worried over there. Well, that if you can tell them don't Mechal Shabbos, thinking that the others saw it as well, and maybe nobody else saw it. So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel will be made. Go be Mechal Shabbos. Over there, there's no carbon involved at all. So therefore, why be Mechal Shabbos? That's why he holds over there. You saw it. Probably others sort of well. Don't be Mechal Shabbos. Over here, we need the Omer, we need the Shabbos dochas, and you have to push away, and you're allowed to push away Shabbos. Maybe Rabbi Yossi would hold that. Yes, go ahead and do the full whatever the mountain you have to do, whatever you do during the week during a Shabbos. Okay, Itma we learned. So that ends the sugya here. That no one necessarily holds like Rabbi Shmuel. Everyone has their own opinions, different scenarios, different cases. Itma we learned. Now comes an interesting subject. Shachat shtei chatois. You shechted 2 korban chatois shel tzibur. Let's say you had the seir of Yom Tov, right? You have, if it was Yom Tov fell out or the fell out on Shabbos, and you did it the seir of a Yizara. And the Einu Tzorech Halachas. You only need one of them. Only one of these korbanos had to be brought up, and you shechted both. You shechted 2 animals, and one animal is redundant. One animal had no reason to be geshachted. You did Chil Shabbos here. So then Omar Rabba said, "V'teimer Rabami, chayiv al hashniya." In other words, you made a mistake. You thought you're allowed to shecht both korbanos on Shabbos because you thought it's a shel tzibur. Let's say we're talking about the seed of Yom Tov. You 2 animals, you shechted both for the be a seed of regal. You thought for whatever reason that you can. So therefore, he said like this: you're chayiv for the second one because you already yotze your seed. What you made a mistake. That's a korban chatas. But a potter out of shayna, and you potter on the first one. Va'afilu nischapel loy b'shniya. Now, even what happens like this, the first part is no chiddush. Now, what do you mean chapel b'shniya? You shechted the first animal, and you had the blood sitting there in a cup about to sprinkle. Then you shechted the second animal. So at the time of shechita, the second animal, there was no need for it. It was totally unnecessary. Then it turned out that the blood of the first one spilled out. So now suddenly the second one, you need it. So b'shas ma'isa, you did the Chil Shabbos, it was an aveda. Okay, shayik. But now it turned out to be the best thing could have happened. So retrospectively, do we say it wasn't aveda or not? Now, but so the first one you potter because when you did it, you shechted. That was the right thing to do. There's nothing to talk about. The question is the second one: are you still chayiv? I feel in his chapel b'shni, you're still chayiv for the second one. Why chayiv for the second one? Because b'shas the shchita, it was unnecessary. What happens afterwards happened afterwards, but it's not retrospective. So when you shechted, so the ma'aser shchita is no good. However, Nachmei continues. Okay, in this previous case, at the time of shchita, it was totally wrong to do it. The first animal you shechted properly. The second one you hadn't already shechting it. Turned out to be you spilled out the blood of the first one, and then you're using the second one. What about it turned out to be the first animal was too weak and it shouldn't have been brought up as a carbon? But you didn't know that till after you shechted it. But the truth was, it was weak at the time you shechted it. I mean, during the shechit itself, your machshava was wrong, but your ma'isa was right. So here we're splitting hairs. So when you shechted the second one, really, it was the right thing to do. But you didn't know that. So what you were doing was an aveda. Let's say b'shegig. What happens then? So he says that even in even though you found out that it's weak, we look at your machshava. And your machshava was you thought you did an aveda, even though you didn't do an aveda, because the first one was no good. Because we have a rule, would you bring a weak, inferior animal as a carbon to your officer? You wouldn't do that. Same thing over here. Says the Gemara. So you're saying that it all goes according to machshava. Even though the pay didn't an aveda, but if you still do an aveda, you're going to bring a carbon chatos for that. Me, Omar Rabba Hachi, did Rabba say that? But Omar Rabba said, how you live fun of shtei chatois? You have two kabbanas in front of you, two animals. Acha shmeina v'akas chusha. One is nice and fat and built, and one is very, very weak, an inferior animal. Shachat shmeina, if you shechted first the shmeina, v'achak on Shabbos, v'achak shachat chusha chayv, and then you shechted the chusha chayv because you were yaitze your carbon with the first one. What are you shechting the second one? On Shabbos, no, on Shabbos. But if you did, let me probably say you did, or a chatz of a tzibur. A chatz of a tzibur, like a cedar, whatever. And chayiv, chush. What about the other way around? If you shechted first the chusha, the achakach shmeina, you potter. Why you potter? Because the poil, the maisa, was good, was right, because the first one was an inferior animal. And furthermore, we tell him, even if we tell him, you shechted the weak one, not the b'di'evet, he shechted the shmeina after, even if you already shechted, which he comes up to the shayla, hey, what should I do? We tell him, go ahead and shecht. In other words, there's nothing, everything was good. So what's going on here? So he boy saying, Gemara says you're right. Some mikchusha b'kamaisa in the first Rava when he says, if you shechted the chush and then the shmeina, he shechted over here that even if he found the first one chush, you're chayiv, picked it out because he holds mefedish. You should have, if you would have asked us, we would have told you to bring the shmeina. Or you boy say, "Mahir Ami," it's not Rabbi, it's Ami. Amalei Ravina Ravashi, Ravina said Ravashi, what happens? What happens if you found that the first one was kusha, but internally? Not that externally you could have seen straight away that kusha. You didn't know till it was internally that was kusha. Mao, what happens then? So when you shechted the second one, you didn't know that it was kusha. So your maisa over here was a maisa of your machshava was a machshava to do an avera because you thought the first one was good. You still decided to bring a second one, but your maisa is doing the right thing. Mao, do we say basa machshavta linen? Do we say we go after your machshava, and therefore the gavli surka machaven, and you thought that you were doing an avera, and you still went and did it? Had you come to us then, and we would have seen the first animal look to us like a shmeina. It's b'nei internally it was no good, but we would have told you not to do it. So the poil, the maisa was the machshav was definitely wrong, but the maisa turned out to be right because the animal was kosher all along. So remember, we're going now according to Rabbah. Rabbah said before that if you found that the first one was kosher, if your first one was chusha, we tell you go ahead and bring a shmeina, right? If you brought a chusha and turned out to be wrong, on Shabbos l'chatchila we tell you go ahead and bring a shmeina. So in other words, therefore, according to him, we want to know what would this case be when your machshav is one way and your mais is another way. Do we say you didn't know, so your machshav is iser because you didn't know about the first one's krisha. And we don't mean really you want to do. We said, remember, we're talking about a shegik, but you should bring a chatas. We meant lepoil. You thought that you thought that you were you knew you just thought that you're allowed to bring a second one. You're allowed to bring a second one. We mean that you at the time you were thinking. What's the right word to use? You were thinking of doing a shchita which was asr. Not that you thought you're doing an issa. You were thinking of doing a shchita which was asr. On an overt level. I don't know what a mice was in. But you look at the mice. The fact is, the mice was nothing wrong because the first animal was a chutcha. Is it machshava or is it mice? Now, if you remember, Rashi tells him getting a mattress that if a woman made a neder to be, let's say, a nozos or made a neder, and the husband went ahead and was matzah neder, and she didn't know, and she drank wine, she needs a Hashem Yisrach law, she needs a kapara, because she thought she was doing a machshava of an aveda, and even though the part wasn't aveda, because the husband already was annulled the neder, the thought alone is an aveda, so she needs slicha. But here we're talking about korban. There's no question that your machshava is aveda, you have to do tshuva for that, but you have to bring a korban chatas where it's only machshava and not maisa. So the Gemara Hamelei the Rabba v'Rava isn't this a machlekes between Rabba and Rava? Didn't we learned fascinating thing? You heard that a kid drowned in the yam. You heard a kid drowned in the yam, but you went fishing and you spread out a net in the water. Lahalos dogim, and your purpose was to go fishing, but you knew about the kid. So we're going to say that in the back of your mind, you thought, well, I might find the kid as well. The hell dog him, and all you found was fish. Chayiv, you're chayiv, because your intention was to catch fish, and you caught fish. Or the lahal is dogging the hell dog him tinuk. If you brought back fish and a child, what happens then? What happened? You brought back a fish and a child. So the ma'isa was your machshava was to fish. Your ma'isa turned out to be was good. You saved the kid. You saved the kid.
But there has to be summer.
Oh, even Rabba who says that, as we'll see in a minute, Rabba Potter, even Rabba says that your Potter is that you had to hear about it before. So we say it in the back of your mind, somewhere there, a little thing there, the little machshava on the kid as well. So the more asking, Rabba Potter Lakim Neshama. Rabba says, even Rabba, who says over here that we're going to be makel, and we're going to say, you know what, you're potter because the fact is that you saved the kid. There's a little bit of machshava here as well. We saved a little machshava. You heard about the kid. But if he wouldn't have heard it all, then even Rabba would be moida. Even Rabba would be moida if he did not hear by the kid, and your intent was do aveda. Then even though the mice and the poil, you save the kid, you would be chayiv. You would be chayiv. So this is not the machlekes or Rabba and Rabba that we have. We ask about the turned out to be was a chusha, and you want to say over there the poil, the mice was a mice good. No one holds. We're saying here now, no one seems to hold that if the mice would be good, but your machshava was totally wrong, that it should be all right. Even in the case of the fishing, and you ended is because you had a shtickle machshava for the kid. Kashama. That's one version. However, those who say, don't say it's not the machlekes, it's exactly the machlekes. That means, the even we learned, if you cut fish, Rabba says you are potter. Rabba says you chayv. Rabba says you potter not because you heard zil bossam meiser. Rabba says you potter not because you heard and there's a shtickle machshava there in the back of your mind. No, nothing to do with that. The fact that you did not do a meiser aveda. A korban chatas is if you did a meiser aveda. So even though your machshava was to go fishing, so it's not even so really. Even if you did not hear about the kid, if you machshava, that's what it seemed. If your machshava was to go fishing and you ended up saving a kid. The din is that you are potter because you look at your ma'isa. You save the kid. And Rabba says you chayiv because zil basa machshavta. Rabba says you chayiv, you go after your machshava. In the Rambam itself, we paskin like Rabba, but the Ravid had an opposite girsa, and therefore the Ravid said, I don't understand the Rambam. How can you paskin like Rabba, which is a Talmud against the Rebbe? So there's a whole discussion achreinim. When do you say the halacha kebasroi? He always goes to later generations. And when do you say you don't pass in a Talmud against the Rebbe? So I can't remember if Meir Bas Yosef. Somebody says this, that the difference is as follows. If the Rebbe and the Talmud are having an argument between each other, we always follow the Rebbe. Because the Rebbe is smarter than the Talmud, knows more, and he argues. But if the Rebbe said one thing, and the Talmud said another din later on somewhere else, then halacha kebasroi. Especially start from Ba'ay Rebbe. Anyway, Omar Rebbe comes along now here. The next few dinim, which are so negated to Hilchos Pekuach Nefesh, is here in Menachos. Din number 1. Amar Rabba says, a sick person that they assess that all he needs is one dried fig and he'll be all right. And V'rotzu asar b'nei adam. 10 people ran, famous Gemara, V'hevi asar gregis. The Vasachas all the same time to it. They're all potter. Why? Because they all went to Pekuach Nefesh. What about Fila B'zachazeh? even they came one after another. They all didn't, even though one was faster and the second guy came already, the first guy was healed. The first guy already had his grade. It doesn't matter. Each one did it l'shem pekuach nefesh on Shabbos. Then he goes further. I feel kodem v'hivri b'rishayna. If the first guy got it first, gave him the gregos, and the guy was healed. By the time you got there, he was no longer a chayla. Doesn't matter. You went with the kavana of pekuach nefesh. So you did everything right. It's a boy rava. So over here, it's different than the case of the fish. Here, you only went for pekuach nefesh to save the person's life. It's a boy rava. Interesting question. They said you need 2 figs. Now you have a choice. You can have, there was a few pieces over there growing. There's only one fig over there, so you can snatch off. They're still on the stem. You have to break it off and dry. So you have to break 2 stems. You're doing 2 malachas. Or v'shalosh ba'iketz achas. Or you have 1 iketz but 3. So and 1 extra one is not part of the pekuach nefesh. So which one should you use? We bring the 2 because that's what he needs. Because you're doing 1 less thing. And what's the shaila? The shaila is, what's the shaila? The shaila is that here you're going to cut off, you have an extra third one you don't need. Surely you bring the 3. That can come, but Rabbi Shmuel Hassam. When does Rabbi Shmuel say that what? That you can cut and everything else. When you're cutting, when you're bringing that from 5 saw to 3 saw, what you're doing is you're cutting less. You're doing less malachas. Why is he minimizing? Why is he reducing on Shabbos the amount? Because you're doing less malachas.
Less of the other.
Yeah, but that's a separate discussion. Why he seems the same malacha doesn't bother so much, but he's doing less malacha with tzira. Over here, what are you doing? If you're gonna you only have 2, but probably you're doing 2 malachas. You bring 3. So the Shalach said, and the Ramos said, I think the Ramos says, I think the Ramos says, but if you have a choice of cutting 1 branch that has 2 gregors and 1 branch that has 3, don't say, mine have kamina. Here, you should cut the 2, because the 3rd gregors, which you're cutting is not pekuach nefesh, so why do that? But then the Shalach says an interesting thing. If you can stop making 2 menichas beinus, you start asking shaylas to Rav. Pekuach nefesh. What Rabbi Chaim Brisker said, when somebody came to become a Rav, he would ask him shaylas pekuach nefesh, and if you had to pull out a sefer, he wouldn't give you smicha, because he said pekuach nefesh you have to be able to answer on the spot. Anyway, this ends today.